Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Sunday, 7/25 of 2021. I am your host, Charles Nash. I am here with another episode of Political Theater. Let's go ahead and get the police, I'll be watching you, cut here. And we've got a pretty good show today. Today, I'm going to be going over a subject that we have heard for years. It's something that don't get me wrong, I laugh about this, and I get that there's people out there that's going to say, well, Mr. Nash, this is serious. This is a serious thing. I get it. But, folks, I call this the natural rate of the world. So what we're going to talk about today in this podcast and on my show, something we keep hearing from not just Democrats, from Republicans, independents, people in Congress and nature. And I just want to address it because it's something that you keep hearing all the time, especially with the Biden administration. And that topic is global warming, or climate change, as it's called. Now, folks, I'm not going to sit here and say that there are not issues in the world that's not created by mankind. There is pollution to our lands and our oceans. I don't sit here and doubt that. Is it something that I think can be cleaned up and everybody can take their part in with recycling, or taking a little bit of time out to pick up the trash out of your yard, or adopt a highway, or, you go to a beach, you pick up your trash? Sure, those things can be corrected quite easily. Same thing with, pollution of chemicals and things. I don't disagree that those things are not real and that they don't cause a problem environmentally. But are they things that can be controlled and prevented? Absolutely. What I'm talking about today, folks, is what you hear for, right now, the Biden administration. What is the number one thing, besides what they claim is, the country being racist? That's the most exponential threat to the United States. Well, the second thing right up there on their agenda is global warming. And we hear about the Green New Deal all the time. So today I want to take the time and I want to break down the Green New Deal, what it is. We've talked about this before, but we haven't broke down the significance of this whole debate with all the political parties with global warming or climate change. So today that's what we're going to do. And I've got some pretty good historical evidence and facts-based evidence to go along with what we're going to talk about. So, to me, in all of the evidence that's out there, I have not yet once seen any shred of evidence that global warming exists. And I know what most people are going to think when they hear this, especially, on iHeartRadio. It's going to be, well, Mr. Nash, there is. It's hot outside, and temperatures, and droughts. Folks, I call this the natural rate of the world, and we're going to talk about why I don't think any of this has to do with climate change that's man-made. So the first thing that I want people to think about is, let's go back to a time when there was no computers. There was no internet. You didn't have a cell phone. You couldn't take a selfie. Let's go back even before any technology. If you go back 200 or 300 years, it doesn't even have to be here in the United States. Let's go back and look at the world globally. How many times in history, from around the world with different civilizations, have you heard any scientific-based or philosopher ever say that there was global warming? You never have. How many times did you actually hear someone say, we're going to freeze to death? We're going to have another ice age? You never heard that. You go back 200 or 300 years, you never hear anything about any of this. And I know people are going to say, well, that's because science today, follow that science that they talk about all the time. Okay, so let's follow the science on this one. So I want to start off with asking everybody, before computer simulations, because that's what scientists and climate experts use. They use computer simulations. It's a computer forecast of what the computer thinks the world's going to be in 10 or 15 years from now, or 40 years from now. And it's always the same thing, doom and gloom. We're either going to freeze to death or we're going to burn. When I was a kid in the 80s, it was, we're all going to freeze to death. There's going to be another ice age. We're all going to freeze. Everything's going to be under a sheet of ice. Then in the late 90s, it shifted. Into the 2010s, it became everyone was going to burn. Does anyone remember, or can go back and remember in their minds? I know this was really in the 90s, about the ozone layer. About how we were putting out so many emissions that the ozone layer had holes in it. And we were causing the world's atmosphere to let in more solar light, that we were going to burn from it, that you could start getting burnt very easily outside. You got to have a higher protective UV lotion put on for you and your family to fight skin cancer. I can remember that. I can remember commercials for that. Or how about you hear from the World Wildlife Organization all the time? How we're cutting down so many trees that the world's going to become too polluted. The air is going to be non-breathable. This was 35 years ago, folks. If you look outside your window, like I'm looking right now, how many people can sit there and say they can't go outside and breathe fresh air? I mean, I can. I can go outside and my air is breathable. It's fine. So, here's what I'm going to say to everybody. You take out all the technology and you go back in history. You never heard anything about any of this, did you? Today, the experts, when you bring that up, their fight is, well, it was never documented. Well, I hate to tell scientists this, but things were documented. Weather conditions were documented. Natural disasters were documented. So I'm going to take a stroll back in time here. I have an interesting article on exploring.com that I thought was pretty interesting. Now, most of these are in the 18 and 1900s, but you've heard the Biden administration. You've heard the global scientists, the real extreme individuals go on about how the weather patterns have become so bad and so furious in the last 20 years. It's nothing like they've ever seen in history before. Well, folks, that's a lie. That's a lie, and I'm going to prove it to everyone here today. You ready? So let's take a stroll back in time. So, in 1888, there was a hurricane called the Great White Hurricane. It hit the East Coast here in the United States. More than 400 people lost their lives during what became known as the Great White Hurricane, the worst death toll in U.S. history from a winter storm. On the 11th and 12th of March, the devastating blizzard dropped 4.2 feet of snow in Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York, which was one of the worst areas hit. Snowdrift buried houses and trains, while fierce winds caused around 200 ships to flounder. That's just one. That was in 1888, folks. Let's jump to 1900. The Great Galveston Storm in Texas. The deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history took place on the 8th of September, 1900, when a Category 4 hurricane ripped apart the island in the city of Galveston, Texas, on the Gulf Coast. The estimated death toll was 6,000 to 12,000 people, was a result of extreme winds, flying debris, and storm swirls that submerged the city. Residents were caught unaware as the U.S. meteorologists had underestimated the warnings from Cuba about an incoming storm and its direction. And that was in 1900, folks, in Texas. Now, you look at hurricanes today. How many times do you hear of a death toll between 6 to 12,000 people? And I know what people's going to say, well, Mr. Nash, that was in the 1900s, this is 2021. Folks, it's no different. You put technology aside, it's no different. Elizabeth Warren for the Democrats in 2016 and in current constantly goes on about how weather patterns have changed. How the storms have become so much more severe than they were back in the old days that's why this is front and center with climate change. Well, if that's the case, then why am I reading history here from past storms that sounds to me were more violent than what they are today, with massive amount more death tolls? So let's continue. 1913, the Great Storm, the Great Lakes. This was in Ohio here, folks. It says a weather-beaten Great Lakes basin witnessed its worst storm ever during November 1913. Also known as the White Hurricane, the blizzards, thunderstorms, powerful winds, lethal waves, and freezing spray of two different weather systems resulted in the deaths of 250 people and the destruction of over 42 ships over a few days. There were pictures taken of this in the Cleveland aftermath of this storm. And it's unbelievable if you can actually look at these photos. I would recommend everybody go and look at these things. The 1922 Knickerbocker storm off the East Coast. A deadly blizzard engulfed the East Coast on the 27th and 28th of January of 1922, with the capital, Washington, D.C., recording a staggering 2.3 feet of snow. The snowbound city largely ground to a halt during what is known to be one of the worst snowstorms in U.S. history. It became known as the Knickerbocker storm after the collapse of the roof of the Knickerbocker Theater due to the heavy snow. It killed 98 people and injured 133 more. So even more fatalities there. 1925, the Great Cyclone Disaster, the Midwest and South. Parts of the Midwest and the South were struck by a huge and devastating outbreak of tornadoes on March 1925, including the deadliest tornado in U.S. history. The Great Tri-State Tornado on 18th of March left a trail of destruction in its path from the southeastern Missouri through the southern parts of Illinois and southwest Indiana. It killed 695 people and destroyed over 15,000 homes. The image shows houses that were carried for more than 50 feet by gusts that reached up over 300 miles per hour. Now again, folks, I'm going to sit here and ask you, global warming, bad storms, we keep hearing how they're terrible now. Well, to me, it looks like the storms were a lot worse back, if you look back here in history, compared to what they are now. Let's continue. Oh, I've got lots of them here, folks. 1926, the Great Miami Hurricane of Florida. A total of 372 people were killed and 43,000 homes were people were left homeless. A 10-foot storm surge walloped Miami Beach in the aftermath of a large and intense tropical cyclone that devastated the greater Miami area. That was in September of 1926, folks. 1928, Okeechobee hurricane in Florida. This hit the Gulf Coast as well as Puerto Rico on September of 1928. It was a Category 4 storm, which made landfall near West Palm Beach, Florida on the 17th of September, destroying many buildings in its wake. The result ended up with 2,500 people drowning and houses being swept away. It was the second largest hurricane in U.S. history. The 1936 Grainesville tornado outbreak in Mississippi and in Georgia, claiming 216 lives, injuring 700 people. Again, that's a tornado. The 1938 the Great New England Hurricane. 8,900 homes were swept into the sea. This happened on October the 3rd. They said that there was waves that reached up to 25 feet. It was nicknamed the Long Island Express and was responsible for 256 deaths. And the pictures of it, folks, I'm telling you now, nothing the like you've seen on the news nowadays. Nor is the death toll anywhere that we've heard or seen in the last 20 years. The 1947 Woodward tornado in Oklahoma happened on the 9th of April, 1947. Injured 1,000 people, killed 185. The storm started in the Texas Panhandle and produced at least 6 tornadoes along a 220-mile path that stretched from Texas to Kansas. The tornado was devastated the town of Woodward, was up to 1.8 miles wide and traveled more than 50 miles per hour. It destroyed over 1,000 homes and businesses. The 1953 Flat Beecher tornado in Michigan injured 844 and killed 116 people. This happened on the 8th of June in Flint, Michigan. The 1954 Hurricane Carl of New England. It's a Category 3 hurricane, folks. Happened in New England on the 31st of August of 1954. Unleashed utter havoc on Rhode Island and the eastern half of Connecticut, and even on the east coast of Massachusetts, with winds up to 135 miles an hour and severe flooding. The 1962 Columbus Day storm in Oregon and Washington State, also known as the Big Blow. This killed 46 people across Oregon and the state of Washington, damaged 50,000 homes, and toppled around 16,000 trees. It remains the most significant windstorm ever recorded in the Portland area. The 1965 Palm Sunday twin tornadoes in Indiana killed 271 people, injuring 15,000 people. That was on the 11th of April of 1965. The 1969 hurricane of Mississippi and the southeastern states. It happened on the 17th of August, 1969. It was a Category 5 hurricane. Caused more than 256 deaths. Winds estimated up to 200 miles per hour. That's a pretty bad hurricane there, folks. The 1972 Hurricane Angus, East Coast, killed 122 people. Caused potential floods, disaster. Estimated 6 million to 10 million in damages. The storm even ripped up the coast, caused terrible flooding in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Virginia. Although this was a Category 1 storm, it still resulted in 122 deaths and caused millions of dollars in damages. The 1978 northeastern blizzard in New England, New Jersey, and New York. Just another show of Mother Nature here throughout history. The 1989 Hurricane Hugo of the Carolinas and Puerto Rico. That happened on September of 22nd. Caused major damage. The 1992 hurricane in Hawaii. The 1992 Hurricane Andrew in Florida. Folks, the list goes on and on. 1996 North American blizzard of various states. Hurricane Floyd in 1999 in the North and South Carolinas. I mean, you go through history, and you can see that this was just in the late 1800s and throughout all the 1900s into early 2000. I mean, here's one from 2011, the Super Twister outbreak in Alabama. I mean, the 2012 Superstorm Sandy, New York and New Jersey. The Harrisburg tornado in 2012. I mean, there's just a lot of natural disasters that have happened over hundreds of years. I just gave you maybe 200 years worth of bad storms in history. You go back 200 years, folks. You can't sit there and say that man caused those natural disasters. That was Mother Nature. We didn't have a bunch of automobiles. We didn't have a bunch of industry where coal and you name it that's being blamed for pollutants in the sky and the ozone damage and everything else that you hear. You didn't have any of that. You go back to where the founding of America and the sailors that came across the oceans, they talked about storms so severe people were ripped off of decks. Ships were torn in two. People died. You go to other places and other countries around the world, you get the same stories over hundreds of years. Again, you take out all the technology that work and pollutants that they're saying is causing global warming, causing us to have to move towards the Green New Deal. And what do you get? There's no data showing this. There's none, folks. The only thing these climate experts have is computer simulations of what these computers think the world could be in 10 to 50 years or more. And it's funny that every time these climate experts come out, this is what they turn to. And when you say to them, what proof do you have? They blow their minds. It turns into this, well, look what we're doing to the world. We're polluting this, we're polluting. Okay. Where's your historical, database showing this from this time period till now to show the science behind your theories? Because that's all they are, folks. They're computer-generated theories. That's all climate change is. And I know. There's people that's out there that's going to say, well, Mr. Nash, you're giving out misinformation. No, I'm not giving out misinformation, folks. I know there's a big fight out there with misinformation. I'm giving you facts. These are facts, folks. I gave you facts from 1888 all the way up till now, showing you that storms have not changed. If anything, they've got less severe here of lately than they have throughout the almost 200 years I just talked about. We didn't even get into earthquakes or tsunamis. I mean, that's just like, you want to... I know there's people out there that go, well, look at the wildfires out in California. Well, folks, there's an easy explanation for that one, too. That's called stupidity by the people that's in charge out there, and that's your Democratic Party. And I know what people's thinking. Well, it's got to be them Republicans and people, too. Hey, folks, that's a blue state out there. It's been blue for God knows how long in California. What do they do out there to prevent wildfires? Do they clear off brush? Nope. The state and its different cities throughout California and the different counties, they do no services to clear out dead timber. Dead foliage on the grounds in the woods and parks. So what do you think's going to happen like this season where they're having a drought out there? You got dry debris everywhere. Of course you're going to have fires. Of course you're going to see thousands and thousands of acreage of woods burned to the ground. Of course you're not going to have breathable weather out there with all those fire and ash. There is a thing called taking responsibility in forestry. Having men and women that go out there with their jobs and clear these areas out so this doesn't happen. But they don't. We have individuals that's out there, like you look at Newsom, Governor Newsom out there. And what does he have? They don't have any of this policies. In fact, it's just debris everywhere. So we have fires. You have smog effects that go into effect. People leaving California in droves because they don't want to live in areas that's not safe. There's nothing to do with global warming. That's a self-made issue right there by the state and its leadership, and one that they could easily fix. They want to talk about droughts out there. Yeah, there's droughts all over different places in the world. It's called, you start with proper irrigation, and you wouldn't have that problem. You go out to California, do they have any water irrigation systems out there that actually work? Is there an actual engineered plan out there for communities, the cities, the state itself? No, there's none. I wonder why. I want to read this article here. It's from the OSS Foundation for U.S. Projects. They do science and solutions for, just about anything. And they really go into global warming. If there's evidence behind global warming. And I want to read this headline to you. So it says 31,000 scientists say no convincing evidence. 31,000 scientists reject global warming and say no evidence is convincing. That humans can or will cause global warming, but polls show that scientists working in the field of climate science have published papers on this topic. 97% of climate scientists surveyed believe global average temperatures have increased during the past century, and 97% think human activity is a significant contributing factor in changing into the global temperatures. What is the science of these statistics and the consequences behind it? So as I'm reading this article, it says 31,000 scientists say there's no convincing evidence, and that there's no, as it's quoted here, catastrophic heating of the atmosphere. So what does that mean, folks? Well, you have scientists that saying, yeah, some things with man are cause issues with the world. But all in all, you have a large amount of scientists in this field of study saying it has nothing to do with the temperature change. And I know what people's going to say. Well, Mr. Nash, look at the temperature. Look at... Okay. I showed you storms over the centuries. The same thing applies all the way up till now. Do we still have snowstorms, folks? We sure do. Last winter here in Ohio was pretty brutal. Several feet of snow. Now, I know most people were saying, well, it's wintertime. You're supposed to have snow. That doesn't mean anything. Well, folks, if the temperatures were getting so crazy in the atmosphere, we'd see really bad changes. There wouldn't be snow. You wouldn't have rain. You'd see the patterns in the forecasts change. We'd see temperate weather conditions changing. We don't. You look at the oceanic winds and the way the flow patterns are around the world, they haven't changed. Not very much. And I know what some people are going to argue. They're going to say, well, you look at Mr. Nash, you look at how the Antarctic is melting at a crazy rate because of global warming and because of people. Is it now? Well, I have something that's very interesting that I would like to read. Because I folks have heard that before. How, and you hear it all the time, polar bears are dying. The caps are melting. Animals can't adapt. Animals can't adapt? Really? That's why we have polar bears breeding now with brown bears. They're not adapting? Isn't that a form of adaptation? Interspecies breeding with other bears? I mean, you can look it up yourselves, folks. Polar bears are starting to breed with brown bears. Why is that? Because of actual climate shift. Doesn't mean it's man-made, folks. If you look back in history of the world, and you go through and look at species that have died off, not because they were hunted out by man, but have died off, what are you going to see? Good example, look at the dinosaurs. If you look and talk to an archaeologist or a paleontologist, what are they all going to say? You can look at the different levels of stone and the different periods of time, and things changed. Biological changes happen. Chemical changes happen. The atmosphere of the earth, the temperatures, heated and cooled. Some species were able to change, some were not. And some died off as a result. Others changed, and you had the whole theory with evolution. Some things evolved. The common mammals that we have today. Some were able to live and some died out. So how many people, thinking about this theory, honestly think that the Antarctica region has always been under an ice cap? Probably most people have never looked this up. Well, believe it or not, folks, there's actually good, strong evidence that Antarctica, at times, went through periods of cool downs and heat ups to the point that there was no ice on the continent itself. There are ancient maps that actually show Antarctica without ice. The world map of Piraeus, which was in 1513. He was an artist and an explorer. So I'm going to read this. A medieval era map discovered in a Turkish palace in 1929 dated to 1513, yet shows the knowledge of fairway lands well beyond the areas of the European explorers, who have traveled, and even shows land features Europeaners couldn't possibly have known about in 1513. Like the Andes Mountains, South America, and the coastline of Antarctic under ice. The map drawn on a piece of gazelle skin was said to be the work of Piraeus, a cartographer and admiral in the Turkish army. Amazingly, the accuracy of Piraeus' map has scholars scratching their heads. Is the map proof of an ancient yet advanced seafaring civilization? When drawing up the map, Piraeus consulted many of the 20 other maps. Some date back to the time of Alexander the Great. The cartographer was careful to note his sources on the map, which he dated 1513. The Piraeus map shows the Antarctic landmass, with 98% covered in glacial ice and snow. The continent of Antarctica was discovered in 1818, several hundreds of years after Piraeus map was drawn, and yet it shows landmass where Antarctica is. Thus, in itself, is astonishing, but yet more curious. The coastline landmass was unfamiliar and therefore deemed inaccurate for hundreds of years until 1961. It was then that Captain Lorenzo W. Boris, a captain in the U.S. Air Force Cartography Division, noted that the outline of the southern mass seemed to be accurately depicted and depicted the coastline of the continent under ice, which is known as Antarctica. How is this possible, given the limitations of the surveying equipment in the 1500s? Well, there's even more to this, folks. This basically sums up that Antarctica was discovered way before it was ever actually discovered in 1818. No different than when Christopher Columbus in history had been said that he discovered America. We know that that's not true. We know that there was other people that had been to America before Christopher Columbus. So why is this any harder to believe? Furthermore, with this article, today, when they do geological graphing of continents and places around the world, what do we have today that's in space? Well, we have satellites, surveying satellites. And they can pinpoint anything around the world to a very tight accuracy and degree. What's more astonishing with Piraeus and these maps, those maps today have been put up against actual satellite imagery. And guess what? It's a perfect layover, folks. It's so precise, it's startled scientists so badly they don't have an explanation for it. When you have a map that's drawn up, dated 1513, and it matches up perfectly with actual satellite imagery, what does that tell you? It's pretty simple, folks. That means that at one time or another, people had been to Antarctica. People had been there when there was no ice in Antarctica, when it was just an actual landmass in itself. So, why do I bring that up? Well, that proves one thing, folks. That this whole debate over global warming is debunked. It's called the world actually heats and cools itself periodically. It's nothing that's new, folks. I know people sitting there probably listening to this, scratching their head going, huh? But we hear all the time about global warming. That's not true. No, it is true. The world goes through different phases of heating and cooling. It's scientifically proven. Look at the seasons, folks. We have 4 seasons. Every year, we go through our normal earthly cycles of seasons, temperature changes. Why would you think any different that the world doesn't do that? That we have areas in the world that graphically heat up because of changes in the world. Not man-made changes, I mean actually environmental changes. That's perfectly normal. Or cooldowns in areas. That's perfectly normal. What I really want to tell people is, and this goes to science as well, does anybody in the scientific field and community who's going on about global warming, does anybody look at not just the natural events that happen with temperature change in the world? Did they ever take into consideration that instead of picking mankind or some other kind of animal or natural event they're saying caused all this, did they ever think that maybe the number one culprit in this is caused by our own sun? How many times within the last 5 years, and I know I've heard twice this year, has the sun's rays and fields caused giant solar flares that stretched out millions of miles from the sun? And they even put out warnings that it could cause issues here on Earth with technology, our satellites, radio interference, you name it. If the sun is causing those type of flare-ups, and it's throwing those flare-ups out into our solar system, did anyone ever really think in the scientific community, well, maybe that's a good reason why some of the climate changes are happening? Maybe it has nothing to do with average day-to-day living by man. Maybe it has to do with what's right up above us that heats us every day. But you never hear any of these studies in science. You never hear that from the scientific community. Well, why? Well, it's an easy answer, folks. Climate change has to do with one thing: the almighty dollar. And I know people's like, well, that's really negative to say that. It's the truth, folks. You look at the new Green Deal that is being proposed in Congress. Do you honestly think any of these politicians give a damn or have even did any factual, historical, or scientific evaluation of anything to do with has to do with climate? No. None of them have. Someone lined their pockets who's throwing fear out, and it said, you tell everyone we're going to die in 10 years or we're going to be underwater, and I'll line your pocket, and we can sell all these people on all these electric cars and solar panels and, all these gadgets to help them out. That's all it is. It's about money, folks. And everyday individuals hear this, and they hear the fear, and what happens? Everyone runs out to buy this stuff that isn't doing anything. It's doing nothing. It's like Joe Biden's administration going, we're getting rid of fossil fuels, and we're going to things that are more energy efficient, and solar and winds, and we want everyone to have a electric car. Okay. I've said this before, I'll say this again. What does it take to make the battery in an electric car? When the battery is done, because it's 3 times the size of a normal car battery, where are we going to put this car battery that's obsolete? Where are you going to properly take all this stuff to get rid of it? See how this doesn't fix anything, folks? It doesn't fix anything. Their answers fix nothing. If anything, it makes it worse. This whole deal with climate change is an absurd joke. It's a joke. And I want people, if they're listening to this podcast, or you're listening to me on iHeartRadio, or you're listening to me on Anchor, or Spotify, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube, wherever, I want you to honestly think about this. Logically think about this. Not what you heard on the news, not even what you hear from me. Logically think about this and pose yourself this question, and then pose it to somebody who says they're a specialist in this field. What data, not current data, what data have you went back in history? Because there's lots of history that's been recorded over hundreds of years with weather patterns. What can you possibly show from then until now that is a clear indicator, 100% proof, that there's global warming and that it's caused by man? They can't answer it. There is nothing. They're going to go, well, my computer simulation, that's it. It's a computer simulation. These people have no idea. No idea. They have no scientific proven fact or facts to show this. None. It's all theory-based. All theory-based. That's like the World Wildlife Organization. When they go on and they say, these animals are dying. Let's say man hasn't touched some of these animals that's endangered. Let's say we never touched any of these animals. We never hunted them. Did they ever think that maybe natural selection, like it's done for hundreds of thousands of years, you're going to have animals that's going to die off? It happens every day. We find species every day, folks. Brand new species. Look it up. We find species every day, even new mammals, not just insects or flies or birds. We find mammals as well that no one ever knew about. Arachnids, you name it. They're finally discovering some of this stuff, and you're telling me that some of these species that are so dense in population in areas that man has never been before, they're affected by global warming because of man? I doubt it. This is just some things, folks, that I've wanted to talk about for a long time over the subject of global warming. You look up the Green New Deal, folks. I want everybody to look up the Democratic, and it's not me attacking the Democrats, because they're the ones who's the majority of individuals that push this garbage. And you got some rhino Republicans, too, that are this way. It's all about the Benjamins, the money, filling their pockets. Go out and look at this actual facts in history, and you're going to see the same thing that I've seen for many years. It don't add up, and it don't make any sense. The natural rate of the world, folks, has not ever changed. It's still very much the way it has always been. We're always going to have storms. We're always going to have blizzards. We're going to have tsunamis. We're going to have earthquakes. We're going to have severe tropical storms, hurricanes, you name it. It's not going to stop just because someone says, it's global warming. It's called the natural rate of the world. It's called the natural consistency of Mother Earth. Don't buy into this computer-generated Green New Deal garbage. Because it's not. They're not making solutions to anything. If anything, they're making bigger problems. That's just like when they go on about how trees are declining Trees are not declining. Under Donald Trump's 4 years, there were more trees planted here in the United States than there's been in 30 years. Every time they cut down a tree, they plant 4 or 5 more in its place. If we had such a decline in trees, folks, you wouldn't see them. You wouldn't see any of them. So I just ask people, use your head. Do your own research. Generate your own conclusions. And it is a topic worth looking at because we're constantly hearing this every day. About like COVID. Follow the science. Well, follow the science, folks. Use your own minds. Use your own facts. I keep telling people, history repeats itself. You can go back and you can really uncover a lot of things by going back and looking at history. Climate change is very easy to look at and make a decision on. Without taking somebody's word that's getting lined with money in their pockets. You can do the research and it's very simple. You can formulate your own questions and these people can't answer them. Because they know the answer to it. And that's what I'm going to leave people here on my podcast with. Formulate your own conclusions, folks. So, this is going to be the end of my podcast here for the day, folks, over climate change. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please, like I always say, feel free to chime in. Feel free to leave a message. If you have a topic that you would like me to talk about, please send me a topic. We'll talk about it. It doesn't even have to be political. It can be anything. Sports, climate change, current technology compared to old technology. You name it, we'll talk about it. School systems, whatever you want to talk about, folks. I am here, and I'm willing to listen to people. So this has been another great podcast and another great episode of Political Theater. I am your host, Charles Nash, and I hope everyone has a great, safe weekend and a great start to the new work week. Thanks, folks. Have a good evening.